deciding turn today, but he's definitely in. And so I think that is us all. And I will hand over. Today we've got Dave Simpson, and he's going to guide us through the story of the 3-foot gauge. As with previous talks, if anyone feels they would like to donate to the museum or the Sinalda Appeal, we would be very appreciative of it. The museum is, of course, an independent charity, and everything that's put into it helps look after the rolling stock and develop the collection further. One of the things we should say tonight, there are some interesting pictures in there. If anyone has any comments or wants to ask Dave, Dave is happy to be interrupted. Just unmute yourself and chip in. And we've also got the chat box there, which we'll keep an eye on as we're going along through the evening. At the moment, you should be able to see Sinalda and the links there. And hopefully you can't see the chat box. But if anyone can see the chat box across Sinalda, do let us know and we'll hide it again. But without further ado, I will hand over to Dave, and he's going to drive the laptop now and take us through the 3-foot gauge.
Okay. Okay, so
It's misbehaving. Try it now. There you are.
Yep. Slight apologies because there will be quite a few pictures that some or most of you will have seen before, but we're just stringing along and mainly using postcards this time. And the basic premise this time is just to get some background on the rather remarkable existence of the railway, despite all sorts of odds. So we'll start sleepy town of Ravenglass, and essentially this was second choice because originally they wanted to move everything down the Eskdale Valley to Eskmeals, but Lord Muncaster didn't want it in his front garden, so it went the other side of Muncaster Fell down Miterdale. So you could almost recognize the photos of Ravenglass from 100 years ago. That's possibly the exception, and it's quite a fun picture because old Joe Farron was the boatman, and his sons, 2 of them drove on the railway in later days. The condition of the thatch at the top is not looking too good, but he's got his cart there on the left-hand side, sign written, of course. And this is at the top end of the village, village hall and public buildings and the bank. And on the right is Gibraltar Row, which obviously is not there now, as people who visited will know. We still don't know actually what went on in there. I don't think it was just a dwelling. I think there was some business going on, but something else to find out. So a little bit further across, we come to the Ravenglass mainline station. So this is looking north, and the goods shed is on the right with the cattle dock and all the bits and pieces. Still looking north. Quite intrigued by this one because there's obviously an excursion come in and southbound, but on the other line, the northbound line, there's a goods train, and we're not quite sure how that maneuver went from there. So if anyone has any ideas. So looking southbound now, and what is now the museum is on your left, down to the signal box. and the signal centre left, towards the bottom of it, there's a fine sign that says "To the Eskdale line," which we now have in the museum. This was the original layout as with, this is what we're certain of. So the blue lines are the standard gauge in the goods yard. The orange ones are what we definitely know. We have quite an interesting plan that Sam Dixon picked up, and on it, it shows fairly similar in pink, but it does actually show a loop on the high level that would tip to the into the wagons below. Sorry, we're just bringing in a latecomer. But that's fine. But Peter says that he thought that the trucks, if they did get that far, actually tipped sideways into the middle of the three sidings there. It's all a matter of conjecture. We've just never found a photo that has anything on the high level at all. And lots of the pictures we've seen have gates across the road, you know, at either side of the road. So again, still to be convinced. So of the three locomotives that we had a contractor's locomotive that was here for 6 months before Devon arrived. And apart from the fact that it was 3-foot gauge, we know nothing about it. So we'll stick to the two that we do know, Devon on the left, Nabgill on the right, and we'll just point out the differences. The top of the dome, Devon originally had a nice curved top, but seemed to lose it quite quickly and spent the rest of its days with the gubbins sticking up. Obviously, once they were fitted with air pumps, the other good guide is that, talking in terms of from the driver's side, Devon's is on the right running board and Nabgill's is on the left. So that's two. Third one is once they came away from top hung smokebox doors, this was the result. So Devon has two quite large straps running across it. Nabgill doesn't. And finally, Devon has a row of rivets above the coupling, two sets of three, whereas Nabgill doesn't. And even if you can't see the rivets, you can see where they put R and ER. In the case of Nabgill, it was lower, it was just above the coupling. So hopefully that those are the clues we have. You can't tell from the back, there's nothing obvious. This was Devon when it first arrived, we think around 1880, and it has still got the top on the dome, but it is definitely Devon. That's just below the big shed. And this is Nabgill sometime later, probably around 1903. And Mary's caption on the bottom says, "The engine at Ravenglass." Again, on the left there, you can see the high level and you can see the fact that it's gated over the road bridge. So we still don't know. This is a nice little sequence of Mary's. Most people will have seen them. In this one, there are more carriages further down the track, which is the next shot. But just as we're going past it, the gentleman, very dapper with his moustache and cane, is Mary's father, the Reverend Fair. We don't know if the lady his mother. So further on from those coaches are, this is a fairly well-known one. So you've got the first class and or first third and the big saloon. Big saloon again, and it just sort of demonstrates how big it was on the axles. This was after Devon had been away for refurbishment at Low Moor, and it's quite a nice plate below the Devon, which says Lauker Engineering Company Limited. Devon got the plate. Whether they patched up Nabgill and didn't put a plate on, or didn't patch up Nabgill, again, it's all a bit vague. Just one of Nabgill. This is slightly intriguing because we've seen special trains made up of the 2-plank and 3-plank wagons, but usually they're in addition to the coaches. So here we've got Nabgill on one end, and we don't think there's a coach on the left at the back. So it's just the trucks this time. Nice little piece, some nice hats there. And then just thrown this in because we like it as a picture. This is 1915. Probably the locomotives had disappeared already and been cut up for scrap, and the rest of the stock was just laid out on the siding. Driver on this one is Robert Proctor Mitchell. Bassett Lokes in the first coach, and Bob Hardy in the boater, with, we think, one of the engineers sitting in the front of the Hayward coach. There is a second picture which shows Bassett Loke standing further back, but the only copy we have is pretty grotty. So starting to move up the line, this is the one that almost everyone will recognize of the station at Miteside, and quite interesting to look at the trees behind. Another one which is less well known, but still has been seen before, and the trees are really taking off. So that's pre-1903, because in 1903, this is Mary's photo that she took to illustrate the wide world feature that she did. And again, the trees have got that much bigger. But it's a tradition we keep up with the boat at the station. And at Miteside, these are two newish pictures which we found in a photo album belonging to the Reverend Fair. And the caption at the bottom from Mary is, "The passengers are much interested in the descent of a passenger at Miteside." So that must have been when they were living there. And again, that's the Reverend Fair climbing down. Everyone will have seen versions of this shot, but this is actually a print from the original negative rather than postcards. So we thought we'd add it in. There was a great debate for a while in the early days of preservation, because if you remember some of the details, particularly the smokebox door, it's obviously Nabgill, but they've stuck one of Devon's tanks on it, which caused no end of confusion. This is Horsfall's wood before it was a wood. Nothing too dramatic there. And moving up, we're getting up towards Urton Road now, and the railway actually runs bottom left corner across to centre right. It's intriguing because the White House, left of centre, was actually demolished to make the police house and rig cottages where Mary lived later. And this is a postcard by the other lady photographer who was taking lots of photos and producing them as postcards, possibly even before Mary, a lady called Mrs. Sutcliffe from Burton and Kendal. Then into the station itself, and again, this is very well known, so we'll move on. The R&N postcard is quite interesting. The far side of the bridge, there's some steps up, which didn't appear to last very long because they very quickly got grown over. There's a horse and cart directly below the station building, and one of our wonderful chocolate machines, which had its own roof to protect it on the left there. Very similar shot a little bit later, and you can see already that the bushes have grown up where the steps were. So don't think they were used very much. The post and rail fence is beginning to really come apart. And if I just go back one, if you imagine the rise really on the left-hand side of the horizon, the next shot is taken looking back towards the village. So the engine at the station building is bottom left with a wagon with a furnace railway tarpaulin on it. And that's looking back up Miterdale, stack of pipes which seem to be there most times. There's an old wagon on the right-hand side, and the little hut doesn't really get shown from this angle very often. These are three pictures that a lot of people think were taken at the same time, but weren't. So this is 1906. And you note the driver has a white coat and isn't Jack Lister. Quite a good clue for the first and second class saloons, in that the first one behind the engine is second class, and the lamp in the roof, the first one is for the guard, and then there's one for all the rest of the coach. The first third has three lamps set into the roof, so they actually went over the compartments. And it's the arrangement of the wagons at the back that tell us that they weren't taken at the same time. The three plank wagons are towards the front of the train, two to the back. And in this one, they're reversed. The two plank wagons are towards the front. Same driver, but we think this was 1905, so a year before. And the third one is, we think, even earlier because it was in Railway magazine, and everything is juxtaposed again. So obviously a popular spot for taking pictures. This is on the road heading more towards Eskdale Green, looking back at the station, which is centre right of the picture, and Hollowstone's farm behind. And it's a slightly closer view. The chocolate machine's still there, so still relatively early days. Lancaster fell behind. And again, this is a shot across effectively the 180 degrees from that previous shot. The road that the previous shot was taken from is centre left, and more houses of the village. This is Mrs. Sutcliffe again. And a very broad view. The postcard was not particularly well printed. You can just make out the train. And again, it's early because there's very little tree cover around Gatehouse, which is directly above the train. Now you really couldn't possibly see it. we've thrown in the ubiquitous goods train with the van in the middle. Again, that's well known, that's a Merry Fair. And we quite like the interesting shape of Eskdale Green Station. We can only assume that it was built square and sagged on the right-hand side. We don't think it was built that way. There is a version of it square, and that does look to be earlier when everything was a bit more pristine. Another postcard, and again, we actually have the original photo for this postcard, which is that. Quite nice and sharp, nabgill, but still producing quite a lot of smoke. This is Devon. We're becoming intrigued currently about the state of the coaches. In that if you try and draw a straight line along the tops of the doors, it's impossible. So that's down train. And this is another one we came across recently, and you can see if you tried to draw a straight line across the top of the doors, no chance. That's an up train this time. Then a view, the bridge at Eskdale Green is beside the house on the left, and the bank going up to Hollinghow is just visible above that. And that's a view from the bridge up towards Hollinghow. We think late 1890s. It could even be as late as 1915, when the assembled people walked the line, Bassett Loke and Proctor Mitchell, but we don't have a firm date. I'm sure David Mosley would be intrigued at the condition of the track there. And speaking of condition of the track, we then move up to Fisher Ground. And the tank appears to have been there from very early days. But the condition, as you can see, of the sleepers, particularly where I was going to say the rails attached, but I'm not sure they are actually attached. And there's a view down from the other side. And again, it does make you wonder how they managed without derailing daily. We quite like this. Apart from the Eskdale Toy Railway, the writing on the side says, passengers are requested not to gather mushrooms while the train is in motion. And the same wag on the back says, express speed 3 miles an hour, sent on the TPO to Coat Hill Station at Armathwaite. This is the double reverse bends at Hollinghead, and in the distance is the only bit that we would see now. That goes off to the right through the cutting. And again, Stuart was commenting on the condition of the rails, the cant, and the drop joint right in the middle. So we know things have improved since then. So moving on up, we get to Stanley Gill at Beckfoot. And I think, if memory serves, it was built 1896. And for us, the intriguing bit is to the left of it is Eskdale Vicarage. And if you're up in the area now, you probably wouldn't be aware that it was there because, again, the tree covers increased. You see the railway line running left to right below centre. And if you look at the ridge behind the vicarage, the next photo was taken from there looking back. So on the right is the vicarage, that's the back of Stanley Gill, and you can see the line running on the fell bottom there. On the very right, just above the vicarage, is our goods shed, which is the reputed basis of the story of the farmer who sent his lad to pick up a chicken coop and came back with the goods station. We put this in, we've just acquired this recently on eBay. And it's the first reference we've seen, physical reference we've seen of the railway being called a rat track railway, which we're all thinking does actually produce the derivation of ratty. Back to Stanley Gill again, and classic Mary Fair, she actually sold this picture to two different postcard companies, and they each produced a postcard, but we have the original picture, which is quite sharp and obviously posed because there's a second photo with the train crew standing beside, and you can see all the staff from Stanley Gill posing. And we thought we'd throw that one in, similar sort of time. On the left, you can see a couple of beehives, and we don't know if the lady standing in the road is Mary's companion. We can't get close enough to discern. This one's been shown quite a few times and caused quite a lot of discussion. We know at least the location because the wall that raises up on the left-hand side is the wall just before what is now Beckford Station. So we have the location, and we have what appears to be another bank holiday special. And this is the only photo we've found featuring two locos. But lots of people have pointed out, and I apologize for the quality of the picture because it's taken from a railway magazine, hence the quality. But lots of people have pointed out that apparently only the left-hand leading engine is producing any sort of effort and resulting in smoke. So we'll leave that for conjecture, and you can argue amongst yourselves. A couple of quick shots. The reason we have so many photos of the Beckford area, particularly in hazardous conditions, is that Mary was living in the vicarage just across the road. So fairly prosaic. It's rather a nice one. Devon on a down train, and lots of passengers waiting. And this is actually much earlier and is from a stereo pair. We know it's a lot earlier because the smoke box door is top hung and there's no sign of any breaking. And we know it's Nab Gill because, as we said, it hasn't got that run of rivets above the coupling, hence the R and ER is much lower. But quite nice. We'd like to find the other half of the stereo pair, but we'll make do with that for the moment. Again, another well-known one. We like this one because Reverend Fair in the centre is engaged with the guard. And we think the gentleman on the left has come to pick up his luggage because the luggage appears with the Reverend Fair behind. And we have absolutely no idea what's in the truck. It's one of Quan's home-built tipper trucks, but we just cannot make out what that is. Again, more photos around the Beckford area. And as referred to before, you have the straps on the smoke box door, the R and ER, and the rivet patterns there to actually confirm what it is. And then from there, we take a little diversion past Dalegarth Hall, and the condition of the building is really pretty grim. In the mid-20s, they did do a complete re-roof and rebuild the chimneys and everything. And guess who actually went to take a before and after photo? I haven't got the after with me, but it's a significant difference. That's Mary all over. She took photos of things that others wouldn't. So past Dalegarth Hall, we go up to Dalegarth Falls, and being intrepid Edwardians, they all climbed up there in long skirts and hobnail boots and whatever. So top left, you can see the assembled mass, and we'll just go in on them. Quite daring, I would have thought. It's possible that the rocks and everything were more stable at that point, so the climbing might have been easier, but I very much doubt there was a proper path. And this, of course, is before the rhododendrons took over the world. So moving on up to Boot, the farm in the very centre is Borrowdale Place, which is now completely derelict to match our mine office building. And it's just moving a little bit further up. It seems that because there was effectively one person taking all the photos, Mary got a concept of the railway in context with the village and with Heart of Fell. So the vast majority of pictures we have at the top end are effectively this view or something similar. This would be probably 1910-ish, and Borrowdale Place is looking at falling apart a little bit. And the intriguing bit is, although the sleepers are still in place, they've lifted the rails. So you can see the sleepers, and again, we could suggest that the lady walking along them is Mary's companion, but can't tell from this distance. This is looking back from Boot Station, and again, the condition of the track. Well, curiously, bits of it look a little bit as though they were filled in with Mersthwaite dust, but that's out of context. Another good example of Mary making money, selling the same picture to two different postcard manufacturers. We know it's the same. It's not only do the two boys on the bridge look to be in the right place, but there's a third one under the bridge. It's a very early one. This is probably the earliest one we have of Boot. Again, top hung smoke box doors, and the station's in place, but the toilet, the famous toilet over the stream, is not yet in there. It's quite a nice sharp one of now, Gil, this is not a Mary Fair. This is a loco in general, and as Stuart was commenting, everything looks nice and shiny on the motion, and it can't just be that it was a pin sharp camera. Someone's obviously done some polishing that. Don't think it's particularly new, and we're also today currently intrigued with the, what would you call it? Piece of wood, piece of metal, just beside the driver's head, which is obviously an extra weather shield. And we can't figure out, it's certainly solid. They used curtains as well, or canvas to protect themselves. Another mystery. Just another example of Mary selling the same photo to 3 different companies this time. And basically the Mary shot where everyone's posed and she's in her favorite place. And we do so wish that she'd actually panned left a bit to give us a bit more detail. Very similar. Some of the passengers are actually out the front posing on that one. And likewise, this gentleman in a straw hat. And they obviously knew when Mary was doing it. I don't know whether she had a fluorescent jacket on. A little bit more there. We get a little bit of the loading bay and the mine office centre left. We now have a toilet just behind the engine. As I say, perched over the stream. It's very effective. Not much to say about that. This one's quite nice. Classic case of the person producing the postcard never having seen the original situation, because there's an awful lot of pink about for green slate roofs. And we're also lucky in this one in that we have Mary's original picture, which is quite sharp and just shows up a bit more detail. Back to the ubiquitous shot. Directly above the loco is the bridge over the beck. So to the left of that is the mill. That's actually 2 different postcards and the same picture, but framed differently. We can see now how she supported herself. And this is quite a nice petit view. You can see the ash pan on the left. And we have a version of this which was produced as a panoramic shot. And there obviously wasn't very much detail to the left of the train. So whoever it was just painted in the rest. So it's his idea of a wall. Intriguing. Again, we're back to the standard shot. This time she sold it to photochrome, but same shot, almost the same place, same sort of people posing. That's a little sharper. We used this as one of our historical series, but this is the original photochrome version. And again, you know, it's nice to be able to pick out details, but again, everyone's posing. Slightly further around, but not dramatically different. And we'd love to know who the lady is on this one. There's a very similar looking lady appears down at Ravenglass a few years later. We also don't know what the writing on the bottom right says. We don't know whether it's a positive or a pasture, but then we can't read the rest. It's all these little bits that people keep adding in. Back to the standard shot. This is probably one of the better ones. We're not sure whether Mary took this because it's an unusual view for her. We can get a better idea of the loading stage from the mill to the left of the shot, with the mine office behind that, much lighter. Same old, same old. This one's intriguing. We're assuming that the personage was known, and it could possibly be one of the Woodley family who, two of the brothers were managers. Father took quite a lot of early photos, including a very rare one of Mary in 1913. So it could be one of the Woodleys, but again, we haven't had it confirmed. This is the generic Synicus postcard where you just insert your own destination. Probably not too far from the truth. And although this is actually a very poor quality print, we've added this in because it's the only shot we have of Boot Station from what's effectively the loading stage. So for those of you who know it, Brook House is the white house centre right. Lots of seats on the platform. Again, the chocolate machine on the platform. And it's a pure coincidence, but just to the right of centre, the post that's standing up is a wire and post fence. And we've just received in the last week one of the stretchers, the tensioners for the wire. It's just come into the museum. So it's nice to be able to have a view of it working, so to speak. Again, this is fairly well known. There is another version of this taken at a slightly lower level, but this is looking across to Knapgill Mine. And just as an aside, a theory has been presented to us that there was indeed a phosphorus-free, very rich vein of hematite running north to south across. But unfortunately, that was during the last ice age, and the glaciers appear to have actually scraped off what would have been a very profitable lode. And where our prospectors thought they were actually getting into the top of the vein, it appears that it was actually the bottom of the vein and everything fizzled out from there. So again, it doesn't really help us. The reason this is good is if I just zoom in, you can see the spoil heaps on the left-hand side going up diagonally, and you can actually pick out the station building and the loading bay, and then to the right, the mine office. And there's even a hint under the 3 trees above the mine office that there was a hut, some sort of enclosure, possibly where they kept the explosives slightly away from the rest of the mine. Brook House again in the foreground. Then, as often happens, people take photos, in this case, Boot Mill, and everyone's supposed to look at the foreground, but we're all peering into the background, because in the background, there are a couple of structures spanned across the spoil heaps, which are intriguing. It looks as though the mine wagons on the aerial ropeway went under those structures. And additionally, because it didn't go that far up for the trucks to go, above it, just to the right of it, there's what appear to be 2 walls that were built with a wooden lining, and the ore from the top is actually slid down there till it could be accessed and put into the mine wagons. So that's a trip up the line. While we were working, it actually struck us that it really was a remarkable survivor, because it seemed to have everything going against it. Faithful Cookson had bought the mining rights for the Eskdale and the Loweswater areas. He sold the rights to the Eskdale area to Whitehaven Iron Mines, then extricated himself and took the Loweswater rights with him, and in the process made around about £35,000 and left the company really very stretched for money. To stretch the money even further, the 3-foot line had been built right the way up to Boot, except for running across 2 acres of Edward Sharp's land at Spout House. And as this is September 1874, he may have thought that he had them over a barrel, so to speak. So he was holding out for a lot more money than they were prepared to pay. So they applied to the Board of Trade and brought in a surveyor, and with the Board of Trade surveyor, both parties agreed to consent to his opinion. And he decided that the price for 2 acres was £300. And we've scaled it up to today's price at £35,500 for 2 acres. And the average price today for 2 acres is between 10 to 14,000. So make your own mind up on that. There was also definite problems with the contractor, because he was contracted to build a mineral line, and a lot of the complication came in 1876 when they decided to, we've got a mineral line, it's a railway line, we'll just change the wagons for coaches, but it wasn't quite so straightforward. And at the same time, this is just to prove that things don't change as time goes on. There was a writ issued against the contractor, Ambrose Oliver, and it was for a claim of £800. And the plaintiff actually said that Oliver had asked him to introduce him to the secretary of the railway and use his influence to obtain the contract. The counterclaim on that, Oliver said he admitted the agreement, but he found out that the plaintiff wasn't acquainted with the board. He simply just knew the name of the Ravenglass Eskdale Railway Company. So he had paid £100 out of 800 and wasn't going to pay any more because he thought that was enough for the name. He was also at the same time still involved with the lines down at Hemel Hempstead, which weren't going very straightforwardly. So it looked as though he was under pressure from all sides. And when he found that he was owed 17,000 by the Whitehaven Iron Mines Company, he sued them for the 17,000, and that was how we ended up in Chancery. So you see, as things go on, it's really surprising that we survived, certainly through that period. And one other interesting thing we picked up recently was the first manager, Mr. James Quan, said that he'd been appointed in 1875 and arrived on the 8th of May, 1875, and he had been working for the North London Railway. So we went and we had a look at staff records, and it turns out that he had been in the employ of the North London Railway since 1871 and resigned on the 8th of May 1875, which ties in nicely. And he was a porter who then became manager of the Ratty. So there are lots and lots of things that we're finding that mitigated against the railway. And that was just in the 3-foot days. And we can find a few more at a later stage.
So if we go there, Dave, we can do that bit for last
Yes.
bit of begging. And then if we stop the screen share, we can see everyone who's there. And we can see the comments as well. So Mike in Wisconsin.
Yes.
The cab extensions look to be providing a little extra protection for the driver.
Yes, and I think they probably needed it, particularly if they fell off the rails and got stuck for a couple of hours. There's a fairly good chance they'd want to stay a little bit dry. Yeah. Any other comments?
I think that's the only comment we've got.
Oh God, it must have been boring.
Well, no, Robert Personal said it was very interesting, Dave.
I do tend to sort of get into a rhythm and then just crash over everything.
With the photographs, and you were saying Mary Fair used to sell them to publishers.
Mm-hmm.
Was there any? Did the publishers approach her, or would she have just randomly gone and said, "I've got some nice pictures of Eskdale"?
It was a combination of the two. She'd cultivated certainly all the local ones, so Mosses at Holmrook and I think of the other Illingworths. They all sort of knew of her.
Okay.
And sometimes she actually made subtle differences in that we've got one photo of River Erd coming down Hollinghow Bank, and in one of the postcards it's as was, in the other she's just edged out the screens on the coaches.
Right, okay.
But you can see she's done it because there's a line. So, but I mean, it seems that most of the postcard manufacturers were just grateful to take pictures from her.
And is there any bits in the 3-foot gauge you'd like to know more about, Dave, that you haven't found yet?
Oh, lots of things, particularly the contractor's logo. Would really like some more detail on that. The mineral extension. Yes. I presume Trevor's talking about the Guildforce extension over the Esk. I don't know why, but I didn't put anything in on that. We don't have any contemporary photos because it opened in 1880-ish and closed again in 1884. I know that Dave used to think that that was his grail photo, to actually find a photo. So yes, we can maybe bolt that on. We have found drawings and application for the junction with the Guildforce line, but the drawings are a bit tedious, so didn't add those in.
So someone would like to know what equipment survives from the 3-foot gauge.
Well, we have 4 or 5 sleepers, and we have various short bits of track of line.
You mean rust?
Yes.
Yeah.
The one down in the museum, which we've saved recently, is flathead and disintegrating rapidly. We're trying to get some conservation wax on it, in the hope that that'll hold the rust together. Apart from that, we've got the big saloon remains of, which are now built into a good facsimile of the size of that, which is in the museum. And I'm struggling to think of any. Oh, the only other one, also in the museum, we have a tipper wagon, which is, should we call it reconstituted, in that the tipper body on top is genuine and came from Fisher ground, and the rest of it was made up using a pair of wheel sets that were sent over from the Isle of Man railway, which do at least give an impression of the size relative to the other stuff we have in the museum. That's about it for the 3-foot stuff.
And we have Burton Road Station still.
Well, yes.
And, some
and
bridges,
the engine shed. The engine shed is substantially as was. Mm-hmm. I'm struggling to think of anything else.
They're still recognisable in the pictures.
Yes.
And then we've got some more messages. You've got 5 now, Dave.
Devon, we think it was refurbished after the brakes were fitted. So that would be sometime between 1896 and 1903 at the latest. The brakes is another whole talk, because we were actually given the instruction to install continuous brakes in 1890. And the last letter we have in that file that says we have now installed continuous brakes was 1896, which is quite good for
it is
putting people off.
Yes. That's
yes,
the Cavan and Leitrim engine that is being overhauled at John Fowler's at the moment.
Yes, I saw a picture of that coming back in on the lorry. Yes, we should really check that.
And Trevor's mentioned the engine shed, just to remind us. Yes. So it's unlikely that Devon and Nabgill are buried in a garden anywhere, isn't it?
Very unlikely.
But if a bit was found, we wouldn't say no, would we?
We wouldn't, but we'd like to be sure, because the local whisper was definitely that the contractors came in as soon as the 15-inch really declared the interest, and just cut them up and put them into wagons.
Yeah. So. We can dream. So I think that's all the questions, and thank you, Dave, for what has been another very interesting and excellent talk, and certainly there's been some really interesting pictures there. Thank you all for tuning in again. We've got to mention Christopher, who will be suffering at this point because he's had his COVID jab tonight. Oh, right. Yes. Right. So he's been a proper trooper attending this evening. We thank you all again for watching. We will be hoping to do something in the first week of July. We're not quite sure what yet, but we will put something together. Christopher's all right. The audience will be pleased to know his arm's not fallen off yet. And so thank you everyone for watching. We will be uploading the Lord of the Rings type trilogy about locomotive practice and performance onto YouTube. At the minute, running little trains up Eskdale is taking precedent of time, but once things calm down a bit, we'll get those uploaded, and this one will be on YouTube as well. But thank you all for watching, and very good night.